Jolly good to see everybody here this evening, and they're still coming in, so that's absolutely delightful. Far too many people to give all of you personal greetings, but there's one or two of you that I've seen a lot of over the last few days in Germany. Well, not really in Germany, but sort of pretend in Germany online, and lots of other people. Lots and lots of other people too. I'm looking at some names here of people that I haven't seen in donkey's years, and there we go. And they're still well. There we go. We'll give it another minute or two. We've still got some people trying to sort of throw themselves upon us. But there we go. Oh, I say so. Yes, they're from Henderson in Tennessee, I can see. And we've got, jolly good to have you with us, John and Debbie there. Excellent. Excellent. And oh, there's Jim all the way from North Carolina. So there we go. And I know we've got folks here from Pacific Northwest, certainly all the way through to Eastern Germany and goodness knows wherever else and that. So there we go. Good evening and welcome to what is actually a rerun of the first of our evening lectures online. When we did this last month, there were a number of people unable to get into the room, but hopefully we've put out plenty of chairs this evening, so everybody who wants to join us should be able to get in. I hope so anyway. So there we go. One or two more still coming in. There we go. Excellent. Good. Well, my name is Patrick. I am a student and follower of Jesus of Nazareth, and I have a long-standing passion for sorry, I'm just getting distracted over here, making sure we're turning off some bells and what have you. Yes, I have a long-standing passion for God, for his word. And for more years than anyone will care to know, I've been teaching with the British Bible School here in the UK. And, you know, we're all about teaching and training in the Word of God for any who care to hear. So if you'd like to know more about what we do, let me encourage you to follow us on social media. I'll pop some links up at the end, okay? And sign up on our website to keep up to date with goings on and see ways in which we might be of service. But welcome to this, the rerun of the first of our evening lectures online. We're planning to run these every couple of months or so on a variety of subjects, and of course, we're delighted to have you with us this evening, but so because this is a rerun and it's falling sort of a month after the first one, we plan to hold another one of these sort of events in approximately 4 weeks' time. Subject is yet to be decided, so you know, keep up to tabs as much as you can, and all will be revealed in due course. But tonight we're going to be looking at the Bible in the British Museum. There we go. Let's share the screen so hopefully everybody can see the abundance of pretty pictures that we're going to be looking at this evening. Okay, so there we go. Yep, that's it. Yeah, we're going to be looking at the Bible in the British Museum, following a brief introduction to the British Museum and its collections. We'll take ourselves on something of a virtual tour of the museum with pictures and explanations of numerous artifacts illustrating aspects of the biblical narrative. Somebody suggested that when I take people around the museum, as I have done on many occasions, indeed, I do see one or two faces here of those who have been subjected to such an actual physical tour. It's been suggested that when I do this, I should wear a hat in order to be sort of properly identified, and maybe carry with me an umbrella. So there we go. But I'm going to dispense with these things this evening, if that's okay with you, because there's absolutely no need, because you're not going anywhere. Well, I hope not anyway. Do stay where you are. And so the plan is to open up things at the end of our talk for any questions that you might have. But if you choose, you can use the chat window, and I'll try to remember to keep an eye on it as we go along. But yes, here we are, and this is the British Museum. Well, at least this is how it would look if you were going to be flying in from the south. I suspect most of us will generally approach it in more conventional ways, and so this is what it'll probably look to us from ground level. Okay, this is the main entrance to the museum in London. So a little bit about the museum itself. The British Museum. There we go. The British Museum was established by an Act of Parliament in 1753. And it belongs to the people of the nation. It was indeed the world's first free national public museum that opened its doors to all studious and curious persons when it first actually opened its doors on the 15th of January, 1759. And it was originally largely based on the collections of the physician and scientist Sir Hans Sloane, and there he is, a splendid looking chap, if ever we saw one. So Sir Hans Sloane was born on the 16th of April 1660 in Killaloe in County Down in what is now Northern Ireland. He was a prominent physician, a collector of objects of natural history and other curiosities, and also president of the Royal Society, later bequeathing his collection to the British nation. And not a lot of people know that he also developed a milk chocolate drink in Jamaica, which was initially used by apothecaries or chemists, but later sold by the Cadbury brothers, a very useful point to ponder a little later this evening when sipping on your hot chocolate. Well, Sloane's collection consisted of over 150,000 objects, natural and artificial rarities, including books and manuscripts, natural history specimens, and antiquities from Egypt, Greece, Rome, the ancient Near East and Far East, and the Americas. In fact, he had more stuff than I have in my house. There are now, within the entire collection, nearly 30 million objects in the British Museum, only a small percentage of which are on display in the museum's 94 galleries, and only a tiny fraction of these will feature in our tour this evening. But of course, our interest this evening is in those artifacts which somehow or other illustrate aspects of the biblical narrative. The British Museum houses the world's largest and most comprehensive collection of Egyptian antiquities outside the Egyptian Museum in Cairo. Last count, there were some 14 million objects. The 7 permanent Egyptian galleries at the British Museum can display only 4% of its Egyptian holdings at any one time. You know, you'd think they'd lend the rest of it out to the rest of us, wouldn't you? Well, with around 280,000 objects. The museum also has the greatest collection of Mesopotamian antiquities outside of Iraq. And of course, we're keeping them jolly safe and sound. Well, it's time for us to venture forth into the museum. Let's find ourselves here at the entrance. In fact, that's where I've been all along, as you might have seen. And so if we would go this way, please, through the main door, try to keep up with everyone else if you can, because we've got quite a bit of walking to do in the minutes that lie ahead of us this evening. So we're going to pass briefly through the great central court. There we are, yep. And this, incidentally, is the largest covered public square in Europe. This is always the time, if we're going on a tour, this is always the time to stop for a loo break, but I'm assuming that you probably have some facilities in your own home, you know, if not down the bottom of the garden. So we won't stop here any longer. We will press on and into the Egyptian sculpture gallery. There we are, jolly good. Okay, so the first object that we will encounter is the Rosetta Stone. There it is, in case you missed it on the way in. This is actually a rather large lump of rock. A large lump of stone weighing just under 3/4 of a ton. It's 3'9" tall, which in is just over a meter or so, and it's made of compact black basalt. It's also the museum's most popular exhibit, and generally it's about as crowded as the opening day of Ascot. In fact, normally you would not be able to see it as close as this at all. So this is the one advantage of the virtual tour. I mean, it really is a matter of sort of prodding umbrellas and argy-bargy, making your way, of course, in a very genteel fashion to the front so that you can take a close look at the thing. Now, this large piece of rock here was discovered in mid-July 1799 by a certain French lieutenant, Pierre-Francois Bouchard, yes, in a small village called Rashid. There we go. Let's see if we can come to, there's Rashid, okay, there it is, in the Nile's western delta, probably built into an ancient wall that was demolished by soldiers of Napoleon's army in making extended fortifications. It was taken to Cairo and then later to Alexandria with the specific purpose of keeping it away from the British. However, following successful operations against the French in the spring of 1801, of course, we're all friends now, old differences forgotten, there was the signing of the Treaty of Capitulation of Alexandria, which in essence ended the war. And this treaty demanded the handing over of the stone. However, despite some somewhat underhanded attempts by a French general, Minot, who tried to hold on to the stone and keep it as his private possession, we said to him, no, no, no. And it was finally shipped to Britain aboard the HMS Egyptian, a French frigate, which we had permanently borrowed from the French. And it arrived in Portsmouth in February 1802, and later that year it was moved to the British Museum. Now, it was originally probably part of a stele, which looks somewhat like this, a large commemorative stone slab. You can see how it probably fitted into that. And it bears an inscription in the form of a decree issued by an assembly of priests in Memphis to celebrate the first anniversary of the coronation of Ptolemy V Epiphanes, which, as you well know, took place in his 8th year in 197 BC. And therefore, the inscription is dated there the 27th of March, 196 BC. And you're sitting there asking yourselves, why should this be of interest to us, at least as far as the biblical narrative is concerned? Well, the inscription is a bilingual inscription in 3 scripts: the Egyptian hieroglyphic, the Egyptian demotic, and the Greek uncials. And it played a very important part in the early deciphering of Egyptian hieroglyphics. So we might ask, what was the secret? Well, the secret was found in the writing of the names of rulers in these elongated ovals. You can see one of them there, or they're known as cartouches, and they always contained a royal name. In fact, there are 6 of them on the stone. There's 5. Where's the other? There it is, just over there in the corner. These contain the name of the ruler Ptolemy, with some longer versions adding the phrase, living forever, beloved of Ptah, as can be plainly seen here. There we go. And once this secret had been discovered, the door to understanding Egyptian hieroglyphic inscriptions could be unlocked, and hence our understanding of Egyptian history forever enhanced. And of course, Egyptian history played a critical role in the development of the nation of Israel. Indeed, the hieroglyphic script would surely have been familiar to the Hebrews in Egypt. And we might very well ask, did Moses, instructed in all the wisdom of the Egyptians, did he learn to read and write it? I'm sure he probably did. Well, we need to make a left turn, make our way through the Egyptian sculpture gallery, stopping rather briefly to look at these 3 chaps. Actually, it's just the one chap in 3 separate poses. I mean, which one of us, when we're taking a selfie, doesn't stop to take 3 just to make sure one of them's okay? Well, this is, these are granite statues of Sesostris III, who was very possibly the pharaoh of the time of Joseph and of Jacob's death, you may recall. And you may note that he has rather big ears. And you're asking, well, where's Noddy? Nowhere to be seen. But it gave rise to his nickname. He's often known as Wingnuts, at least in contemporary circles. But his large ears are possibly indicative of his willingness to listen to his subjects. And I think it would be a jolly good thing for all leaders of God's people today to also have big ears and listen well to those for whom we have some responsibility. Now, Sesostris III is sometimes known also as Senusret III. He ruled Egypt from 1878 to 1839, but you're not going to remember all of those dates. You don't need to. He was the 5th monarch of the 12th dynasty during the Middle Kingdom period of Israel. And all of that may be somewhat gobbledygook to some of us. And here is neither the time nor place to explain archaeological periods or the chronology of Egyptian dynasties. However, if you choose to download the free PDF guide from the Evening Lectures online section of our website, you will find a couple of useful lists in this regard at the end of the booklet. We, however, cannot stop here. We must move a little further down the gallery to this rather fascinating Egyptian king list. Now, at this point, I would usually give those who might be accompanying me on a tour of the museum a very important lesson in history. And that is that it is well known that the true historic details of any event will always be those recorded by the English. For example, if one was wanting to know the correct version of events that befell the colonies towards the end of the 18th century AD, one would want to read an English history textbook and not one written anywhere else. Well, of course, I jest when I say all of that. I mean, I do really. That wasn't intended to be serious at all, you understand. Because they say that history is always written by the victors, isn't it? But the rest of us like to have a jolly good go ourselves. And of course, the real truth is that virtually all accounts of historic events are biased. And here before us on our screen this evening is an excellent example of that. This Egyptian king list comes from the temple of Ramesses II at Abydos, but it is notable for its omission of 4 rulers. Now, because you've all just very recently learned how to read hieroglyphic text, you will be able to notice immediately that the 4 rulers missing include none other than Amenhotep IV, also known, of course, as Akhenaten, and also Tutankhamun. Yeah, if you look very closely, you'll see very clearly that their names are not there. And the question that will be springing to all of our minds is, why on earth not? Well, the simple reason seems to be that these 4 rulers were associated with what came to be known as the Armana Heresy. And this was essentially that which had been instigated by Amenhotep IV, aka Akhenaten, who had introduced a form of monotheism. I mean, who would have thought? Yes, of course, not quite that with which we would be familiar. It involved, of course, worship of the sun god and well, so a little later, Tutankhamun reintroduced the very complex polytheism that had generally been the mainstay of the Egyptians. But it's as if they wished to eradicate any association with that part of history. And so, well, just a little bit like today, you've got people taking down statues in order to rewrite the history. Nothing is new under the sun. In case we thought that the rewriting of history was the exclusive privilege of the Egyptians or the Assyrians or the Babylonians or the Romans or whoever, well, we find ourselves right now in such times as these, where there are those looking to erase monuments, rewrite the history of our past. We need always to beware. Now, all of this, and this is why I think there is a terribly important lesson here. All of this stands in stark contrast with what is, I believe, the only truly reliable historical record anywhere known to mankind. And it is that found within the pages of Scripture. Indeed, there are many who would take a quite different view, but consider this. If the nation of Israel were writing their own history, do we really think that it would paint them to be the most rebellious, ungrateful, two-timing losers that we read of throughout the biblical record? You know, the no-holds-barred version of Israelite history recorded in the Hebrew scriptures, the one which you may recall Stephen used against his own people in chapter 7 of the book of Acts, and which, of course, led to his untimely death. That history is a powerful testimony to its authenticity. For at the end of the day, it never was the history of the people of Israel. It always was the history of Yahweh, the God of Israel, and his dealings with mankind. But we must move on, as we have an awful lot more to see. Just around the corner, there are a number of obelisks and stelae and wall panels from Assyria. So we have moved from Egypt a little forward in time to the period of the Assyrian Empire, and there is so much to see here. But let me first introduce you to somebody who you really ought to know, a chap by the name of Sir Austin Henry Layard, a British traveller, archaeologist, cuneiformist, art historian, draftsman, collector, author, and diplomat, best known as the excavator of Nimrod. Not terribly sure what he did in his spare time, but anyway, that was probably it, I suppose. Nimrod, as you may know, was was Assyria's capital for some 150 years. Now, Ashurnazirpal II was the founder of the empire proper and had a palace in Nimrod, which was excavated by Layard in the middle of the 19th century. And his son was Shalmaneser III. That's Ashurnazirpal's son, not Layard's. But you knew that, didn't you? And so in this area where we find ourselves, and recognizing, of course, that the history of Assyria meshes on so many occasions for a significant period of time with the history of the people of God. But in this area where we were just a moment ago, we will find an object known as the Black Obelisk of Shalmaneser III. And if you're not terribly sure which one of those objects it is, well, the name might give it away. Okay, this Black Obelisk of Shalmaneser III, discovered by Henry Layard in 1846 at Nimrod. Now, the story goes is that they had been digging for quite some time, and there was a fairly lengthy trench, about 50 feet. They were digging into the center of the mound, and it came time to stop for tea. Everything, of course, must stop for tea. But they noticed projecting just from the ground the corner of a black object. And so rather than, well, I can't imagine that they would not have stopped for tea. You know, maybe they had a very quick one and came back, and they cleared away the ground, and they discovered this black obelisk lying on its side about 10 feet beneath the surface. It's decorated with 5 rows of reliefs. It depicts tribute brought by 5 nations to Shalmaneser III, king of Assyria. And there's 190 lines of text. We're not going to read them all this evening, but they record a number of military campaigns against the surrounding nations, including Ben-Hadad and Hazael of Damascus. And the second tier from the top shows none other than King Jehu of Israel. bringing tribute to Shalmaneser. There he is. There's the second tier from the top, and there you should see Jehu, This is the only known photograph of any Israelite king, and there he is, King Jehu, bowing down before Shalmaneser III. Of course, he ought not to have been doing this. You know, if he was going to bow down, it really ought to have been before his God. But well, he wasn't particularly that way inclined. Now, the text just above reads, if we can take a look at it, there we go. If you have a look at the cuneiform text, we've not really done much with cuneiform. We learned the hieroglyphic text a few moments ago. I'll give you a little clue here. When reading cuneiform, that when you come to what looks sort of like a letter T, it isn't, but it looks a little bit like, that's the easiest way to describe it, then what follows after it is an individual's name. And the text there reads, from Jehu, son of Omri. Well, actually, he wasn't, but the Assyrians evidently didn't know that, nor did they particularly care. From Jehu, son of Omri, silver, gold, a golden bowl, a golden vase, golden tumblers, golden buckets, tin, a staff for the hand of a king, and hunting spears I received. Yes, he liked his gold, didn't he? Shalmaneser is pictured there beneath the winged symbol of Assyrian god Assur, from which they got their name Assyrians. And there we go, a fascinating object, and there with this picture, the only known picture that we have of an Israelite king. Well, in this same vicinity, we'll want to take a look at the what's often known as the Astartu relief of Tiglath-Pileser III. Incidentally, Tiglath-Pileser III is the first Assyrian king mentioned by name within the Hebrew scriptures, within the Old Testament scriptures. He's known initially as Pul, P-U-L, and that comes from the Tiglath-Pileser, yeah, or TP3 for short. And this wall relief here depicts the king in his chariot beneath the defeated city of Astartu, probably to be identified with Ashtaroth in Bashan, as recorded in the books of Deuteronomy and Joshua. Well, we can linger here no more. We must turn around, walk across to the other side of the gallery, where we will be encountered by these rather large human-headed winged lions. These come from Ashurnazirpal II's throne room. You remember we mentioned Ashurnazirpal II a moment ago? He was the chap who was the founder of the empire proper, the one who had the palace in, well, a number who had a palace in Nimrod, where Assyria's capital was for some 150 years before eventually moving to Nineveh. These again were excavated by Henry Layard in the middle of the 19th century. And there's a little story that apparently when these were discovered, they caused quite a stir in the local community, and the local sheik exclaimed, "This is not the work of men's hands, but of those infidel giants of whom the prophet, peace be with him, has said were higher than the tallest date trees. This is one of the idols which Noah, peace be with him, cursed before the flood." Well, I don't know where he got all of that from, but that was his impression of these rather magnificent looking pieces. Later, the local governor concluded that actually everything was okay. They were the work of the Magi, apparently, and they were to be sent to England to form the gateway of the palace of the Queen. Well, they didn't quite make it as far as that. And so we will walk through these and notice this chap who's standing in the middle there in front of these rather large wooden gates. They're reconstructed gates. We'll come to those in a moment. First of all, here is the chap himself, Ashurnazirpal II. What a ridiculous looking character he is, of course. And the gates before which he is standing are the Balawat gates. There they are again. They're rather impressive, aren't they? And if these are the sort of gates that the Assyrians had surrounding their cities, then it's no wonder that Jonah might have been a little apprehensive to take that journey to Nineveh sometime later on. Okay, well, these are not very far from Nimrod. The site of Balawat was excavated near the end of the 19th century, and 3 sets of gates were discovered, 2 of which are now in the museum. They were decorated with bands of embossed bronze, dating from the reign of Ashurnazirpal II and his son Shalmaneser III, whose black obelisk we just saw, you may recall. And well, these are reconstructed gates, but either side are some cases displaying some of the original bronze bands, and the illustrations on these bronze bands, these then are original, dating back then to the first millennia BC. They contain illustrations quite similar to those which we find on numerous wall panels from various palaces. And note particularly the scenes depicting religious ceremonies and those depicting warfare, which seem to be the 2 favorite occupations of the Assyrians, at least certainly in their formative years. However, we've no time to linger here, for we must turn right and into a series of galleries displaying numerous wall panels from the palaces of various Assyrian kings. This first room contains decorative panels from the palace of Ashurnazirpal II, but we have no time to linger here tonight. We must take a left turn very quickly and take a look at some panels from, particularly some detail of some panels from Ashurbanipal's royal lion hunt. These are among some of the most precious treasures within the museum. And the palace of Ashurbanipal, he was the Sennacherib's grandson. And incidentally, we should say that Ashurbanipal is not to be confused with Ashurnazirpal II, of whom we have been speaking. 2 completely different kings. I mean, they sound totally different, do they not? Ashurnazirpal II, chap who was really credited with the founding of the empire proper. Ashurnazirpal, one of the last kings of the Assyrian Empire. And there he is on the screen in front of you, being so terribly heroic. Now, the palace was built, incidentally. Ashurbanipal is known in scripture by the name of Onsnapper. You may have come across him in Nehemiah and what have you, in Ezra chapter 4. I think you'll find him there. The palace of Ashurbanipal was built in the middle of the 7th century BC, so about 200 years after the time of Ashurnazirpal II. And it contained some of the finest sculptured panels found in any of the Assyrian palaces, including the royal lion hunt. And the idea is that we're to look at these panels and note not only the suffering of the lions, but also the heroism of the king. There's a little story. I don't know that we've got time to say much. Very briefly, very briefly, the palace of Banapal was excavated in secret by moonlight in order to avoid the suspicion of the French archaeologists who had already laid some sort of a claim upon the mound. Now, I've seen Justin in our room here this evening, so I'm sure you'll appreciate this in the sentiment in which it is given here, and any others who may come from his part of the world. Well, basically, the French had already sort of laid claim. I don't know how they would do that in French, but they did it anyway. And so the British came along in secret by moonlight, so they couldn't be seen or heard. And on the third night, this is sort of Indiana Jones stuff, isn't it? On the third night, the panels were discovered. And apparently this eliminated any further need for secrecy because it was an established rule, Layard says, that whenever one discovered a new palace, no one else could meddle with it. And thus, in my position as agent of the British Museum, I had secured it for England. Oh, bravo, hurrah, and all the rest of it. Well, anyway, we'll leave that story there. But that's why they're here in the British Museum today, and that's why we're looking at them tonight. The Mesopotamian lion, it should be said, is now extinct, and we wonder why. I mean, thousands of them were killed in the hunt, and it was smaller than the African lion, apparently, but it still posed a threat to civilization, and it had long been seen as the king's privilege or his responsibility to kill such beasts. There was a letter discovered, written on a cuneiform tablet by there was a chap, he discovered a lion in his loft, you know, as you do. And he'd written to the king saying, what should I do with this? And the king said, send it to the palace so that it can be hunted, you know, by the king. Well, I'm not terribly sure how you'd package a Mesopotamian lion, but I'm sure that's what he did. And so there we go. It's maybe worthwhile noticing in all of this the intricacy of the carvings and of course their love of sport. This is much later on in the period of empire. They're not so concerned perhaps about as much of their religion. They are still concerned with it, of course. They're maybe not so concerned about brutally killing people as once they were. They're now enjoying themselves. Sport and art have become things, and of course things which preceded the demise of the empire. We really need to move on. I've already lingered here far too long. Goodness gracious me. We need to move on past these incredible scenes. And bear in mind that these panels would originally have been in full color. And this is an artist's impression of Ashurnazirpal II's throne room at Nimrud. And if you look very carefully at one or two of the wall panels, you will see some pigment that remains behind. Here is a chap's shoe, and rather trendy, of course. Well, we need to move on into what is probably my favorite room in the museum. And here we are. Now, look at this. Does this not look like the most exciting room that ever there was? Absolutely incredible. Well, I'd like to spend the whole evening here, but we cannot. However, I think on one of these evening lectures online in due course, we probably will, maybe not the whole evening in this room, but these here are wall panels, a series of panels from Sennacherib's palace showing the fall of the city of Lakish, which at one time was Judah's second city, second only in importance to Jerusalem. Well, to cut a long story short, some 20 years following the fall of Israel, which Israel fell, you recall Samaria fell in the year 722, 721 BC, Sennacherib invaded Judah. Now, the death of Sargon II, that's the father of Sennacherib, had prompted Judah to rebel and to seek an alliance with Egypt. Sennacherib had destroyed many of Judah's fortified cities, including Lakish. Of course, he never destroyed Jerusalem, but that's another story for another time, is it not? In 1847, Layard visited the site, discovered Sennacherib's palace, and these wall panels were the first real archaeological confirmation of an actual biblical event. And that's why they are of such immense significance and excitement. And as I've said, we do not have time to do justice to the magnitude of this monumental memorial, nor for me to indulge you with personal delights of such a sumptuous scene as this. We'll come back to that another time. Let's very, very quickly look at some of the detail, and I mean rapidly. We'll look here. Here are some of the archers and slingshot throwers. A little further on, we come to some of the siege ramps. There we go. There are some of the siege ramps there, up which the Assyrians are ascending on their way to the city. Here are some of the Judahite defenders here at the top of their tower. That's part of the city of Lakish depicted here on the wall panel from Nineveh. And then we've got some there. They had some of them in detail there, shooting the arrows down. There are some of the Assyrian archers attacking the city, and there's one of their siege engines, like sort of a battering ram. You might have seen something a little similar on one of the bronze panels earlier from the gates there. Well, moving on, here are some of the residents who were being taken off into exile, mothers with their children. Oh, how terribly, terribly sad all of this is. And we've got here, there we go, we've got here some of the leaders being impaled, which is not a very pleasant thing to have happen to you. And some of them here are being flayed alive. There we go. Oh, there we are. How horrible. And if you're not sure what that involves, well, if you're eating, then, turn away at this point. It's, no, I'm sure, not a pleasant thing to be skinned whilst still, well, I don't know how long would, anyway, there we go. So, well, there we go. That's all very nasty, nasty, nasty stuff. There we go. And we got a beheading. They're quite a popular thing in that part of the world, of course, even today, tragically, even today. Well, here is Sennacherib himself sitting upon the throne. And we know that it's Sennacherib because you see that inscription up there. Take a look at the first line. You'll see there that it sort of begins with that T shape. Then you know there's a name coming after it. And the name is Sennacherib, who's king of the world, king of the land of Assyria. And the last line there contains the name of the city of Lakish. And if we go to the other end of the gallery, we'll find a few objects. There are some arrowheads there, and there are some sling stones. There we go, from Lakish itself. So these were in the pictures. Yeah, these were in the pictures that were there displayed on the walls of Sennacherib's palace in the Assyrian capital city of Nineveh. Well, there is so much more to see, such as some human-headed winged bulls of Sargon II. There's even the Parthenon frieze from Athens. We're not going to look at that tonight. We will, however, make a very slight diversion into room 22, the world of Alexandria. And I want you to notice that object in the middle. Here's a closer look at it. There we go. Oh, at this point, of course, if we were there, we'd be saying, ladies, please look not. For here is the base of a column drum from Ephesus, from the temple of Artemis, or Diana of the Ephesians. This formed the base of one of 127 columns of this wonder of the ancient world. And it would certainly have been there during the time of the New Testament. Paul would quite likely have seen this if he had ventured close enough to do so. We need to swiftly pass by a few more panels from a palace of Tigleth by Liza III in Nimrod. There's a Phoenician warship relief, and we'll take a very quick diversion before we ascend the stairs to the far end of the Egyptian sculpture gallery. And you see that object in the very middle there of the screen. This, let's take a closer look at it. There we go. You might recognize this from the poster that we had up. This is a granite Amun-Ram with Taharqa. Taharqa, or Taharqa, however you want to pronounce his name, he was that broken reed of a staff on whom Hezekiah relied when he was threatened by Sennacherib of Assyria. There we go. We've got the close-up him there. Let's have a look. There he is. There's Taharqa there. Isaiah advised him, of course, to simply trust in God. This, however, is what the king of Assyria, what Sennacherib, remember, he's the one who brought about the destruction of Lakish that we've just seen. So all of that, this is happening at that same time. This is what the king of Assyria, Sennacherib, said to Hezekiah, king of Judah. He said, on what do you rest this trust of yours? Do you think that mere words are strategy and power for war? In whom do you now trust that you have rebelled against me? Behold, you're trusting in Egypt, that broken reed of a staff, which will pierce the hand of any man who leans on it. Such is Pharaoh, king of Egypt, to all who trust in him. And he was speaking of Taharqa here. Yes, indeed. Well, you know, and I know, and Hezekiah came to understand because Isaiah knew that all along he simply needed to trust in God. Well, just before we head upstairs, we could make another useful excursion, descending the stairs to the left, passing through the Ephesus gallery, turning right, making our way through the Greek sculptures, as far as room 78, which we will find the Polytarq inscription. This inscription reveals the historic accuracy of Luke, the writer of the book of Acts, by using the word Polytarq. There it is on the top. You see it, there we go, yes. And a word which critics said was not relevant in Thessalonica until this inscription was discovered. And Luke writes of an incident in Thessalonica as they were looking for Paul and Silas, and when they could not find them, they dragged Jason and some of the brothers before the city authorities, shouting, "These men who have turned the world upside down have come here also. Don't we long to be accused of turning our worlds upside down with the teaching of Jesus? We have no more time to linger here, for it is time to ascend the stairs. Now I suggest you do so from the comfort of your living room or wherever it might happen to be. But if you want to sort of, live some of the experience, then you could run up and down your staircase several dozen times just to sort of get the feel of things. We're going to go past the reconstructed Jericho tomb scene and into the ancient Levant galleries. That's where we are going to find ourselves now. Yes. once known as the Holy Land Gallery, and it was much smaller than it is now. They're really quite terrific, and one could easily spend, oh goodness, 2 or 3 days in this series of rooms here. Very, very easily one could do that. We're going to look at just 1 or 2 objects, and this is very difficult to select. I mean, I don't even know if I've selected 1 or 2 objects for us to take a look at very, very briefly. First of all, we've got a Bronze Age oil lamp, and so there we go. There are a number of these here, and so this would have been, we're talking about Bronze Age. This one here is really looks like it's there from the sort of middle Bronze Age period, so roughly around the time of Abraham. Moving on a little further, we have the Armana Letters, found in 1887 in Armana in Egypt. These, remember we mentioned earlier about the Armani Heresy, you know, the city of Armana was built by Amenhotep IV, or as he later became known, Akhenaten, and so these were discovered there in that city. They date from the 14th century BC, inscribed in Akkadian cuneiform, and they represent the diplomatic correspondence from vassal rulers to the various pharaohs, the rulers in Egypt, including Amenhotep III and the fourth, Akhenaten, and Tutankhamun. Those from Canaan well document the history of the land before and also during the arrival of the Israelites. So they're really quite fascinating, and they do speak of a foreign people who are coming into the land, and I think almost certainly it must be speaking of the Hebrews, as God led them out of captivity in Egypt into the land that he had promised their ancestors. Moving down a little bit further, we have some Sumerian ivories, you know, dating a little later than the time of Ahab, but certainly illustrating perhaps his ivory house, in which much of his furniture must have been decorated with things of this nature. There are some figurines from Lakish and other objects. The figurines often of Astarte or Asherah, items that illustrate how many Judeans continued to honor Canaanite gods long after they had inhabited the land. And you'll notice there a rattle. Some of you who are with us for our Friday evening quiz, was it last week? I think just over a week ago, we had a look at one of these rattles like that, didn't we? And we've seen some of these idols here. And this is a terrible indictment on the people of God. If we wonder, why did God send his people? Why did God send Judah into exile in Babylon? This is the reason: because they continued to worship the gods of the land. And there are a number of artifacts here from a tomb in Bethlehem, which is only just down the road from Lakish. Again, dating from the same period during the time of the divided kingdom, just shortly before they went into exile into Babylon. Moving down a little further, we've got some rather delightful jar handles, lamelic jar handles from Lakish. These we know date from the late 8th to the 7th century BC. In fact, they date from the same time as that siege of Lakish we saw earlier. They bear the Hebrew inscription Lamelech, meaning belonging to the king, and the king in question we know to be none other than King Hezekiah of Judah. and a man certainly known for his administrative abilities. Just a little sort of to the right and up on the wall, there is what is known as the Royal Steward inscription, dating from again a similar time, the time of the prophet Isaiah, written in standard Hebrew. It's come from a rock-cut tomb. It's the lintel of a tomb, and it is very likely that of Shebna, the royal steward of Hezekiah, who was accused of carving a habitation for himself in the rock. Have a look at Isaiah chapter 22 and 2 Kings chapter 18, in which we read of the arrogance of this man. And this is almost certainly, I'm about 98.34% sure that this must be the tomb, the lintel from that tomb. Moving on a little further here, we've got these Lakish letters written on potsherds, bits of broken pottery. They were sent from the outposts of Lakish later than the Assyrian destruction that we saw in those wall panels during the time of Sennacherib. These date from the time of the destruction of the same city of Lakish by the Babylonians at the time when Judah was taken into captivity in Babylon. Now, Jeremiah, let's just see here. There we go. Jeremiah says this in his book, that when the army of the king of Babylon, that's Nebuchadnezzar, of course, when the army of the king of Babylon was fighting against Jerusalem and against all the cities of Judah that were left, Lakish, he mentions, and Azekah, the only fortified cities of Judah that remain. Well, that is what Jeremiah says. Now, one of these letters, as we call them, reads, "May Yahweh cause my Lord to hear news of peace, even now, even now." Notice the desperation there expressed on this letter. And another one mentions the beacons of Lakish and Azekah, and goes on to say, "But we do not see Azekah," another city not terribly far away, in fact, on the way from Lakish to Beth Shemesh, that we will talk about one day. Moving on then from here, these incidentally were discovered at Lakish in the Iron Age gatehouse. Well, we're going to just very briefly take a look at some rather splendid artifacts from the royal cemetery at Ur. This piece here, known as the Ram in the Thicket, would probably have formed the leg of a piece of furniture. This, of course, is the city of Abraham, from which many exhibits have been preserved. There's the standard of Ur. There's the royal game. You can buy a replica of this if you wish to play it in the comfort of your own home, and some beautiful jewelry. Oh, yes, if you had been looking for something for your beloved, if you have an anniversary, this is the kind of thing you want to be thinking of. She will love you for it. But we have no more time to linger here. We must move on a little further. And this rather splendid piece here is a clay model of a sheep's liver. And you may be thinking, what on earth is this for? Well, it's terribly, terribly useful. It's used to train in the art of divination. You may recall there was a time recorded by the prophet Ezekiel in chapter 21 of his book, where Nebuchadnezzar comes to a fork in the road. The road divides. It wasn't not a piece of cutlery, but the road divided. One way it was going to Judah, the other way it was going to Ammon, and he doesn't know which way to go. And so he does a number of things, consulting the gods, and one of them involves reading the liver of a dead animal. I mean, that's terribly useful. You want to know how to do it? Well, you get a hold of this, you learn all the information recorded on this object, you go and find yourself a liver from a dead animal, you see where there be any blemishes, you match it up, and hey presto. Actually, I think we're better off just sticking with the word of God. That always worked. Moving on a little further, we'll take a look at the Taylor prism, so also known as the Sennacherib prism. And it contains an account of military campaigns of Sennacherib, king of Assyria. Remember, he's the chap who brought about the downfall of Lakish. And he speaks of his campaign against Hezekiah, king of Judah. He says, as to Hezekiah the Jew, he did not submit to my yoke. I lay siege to 46 of his strong cities, walled forts, and to the countless small villages in their vicinity, and conquered them by means of well-stamped earth ramps. Do you remember we saw those in the picture earlier, didn't we? And battering rams brought thus near to the walls, combined with the attack by foot soldiers, using mines, breaches, as well as sapper work. I drove out of them 200,150 people, young and old, male and female, horses, mules, donkeys, camels, big and small cattle, beyond counting, and considered them booty. Himself, that is Hezekiah, I made a prisoner in Jerusalem, his royal residence, like a bird in a cage. Ah, well, Sennacherib, that's not what you had intended, is it? Oh no, he had intended to destroy Jerusalem, but God would not let him. You may recall from your reading of the book of the prophet Isaiah. I hope you don't mind me reading it to you there in English. I thought it was a lot easier than reading it there in the Akkadian language, which I absolutely do not know. Just opposite here, there's a rather splendid Assyrian helmet, just like those that we saw in the pictures on the wall panels downstairs. A little bit further, there's a brick, as you can see clearly here, bearing the name of Nebuchadnezzar. There are many, many, many of these. You maybe have one in your own collection, perhaps, I don't know. But there's quite a number of them within the museum elsewhere, commemorating the rebuilding of two temples in Babylon. We've got a clay tablet here from the Babylonian records, and this one here summarizes the main events of the year, this Babylonian chronicle, and it covers the years of the exile of the Jews from Jerusalem into Babylon. And did I put a bit of the text? I did. Let's just, in the 7th year, the month of Kislimi, the king of Akkad, that's Nebuchadnezzar, mastered his troops, marched to the Hatti land, that's Syria and Palestine, camped against the city of Judah, that'll be Jerusalem, and on the 2nd day of the month of Adaru, he seized the city, captured the king, that would have been Jehoiakim, and appointed there another king, Zedekiah, he's the wimp, you remember, another king of his heart, that was Nebuchadnezzar's choice, received its heavy tribute and sent it to Babylon. So this here just we shouldn't be looking to archaeological evidence to confirm the truth of Scripture. The truth of Scripture should stand for itself. If anything, the Scriptures confirm the accuracy of the secular records. And that's an important point that we ought to make at least some point this evening. And we need to wrap up very quickly. I'd like to show you, of course, Jerusalem fell there in 597 BC. I'd like to show you here the Nebo-Sasekim tablet, one which includes a name, the same as a name recorded, and the same person recorded by Jeremiah in his book, chapter 39. There's the Gilgamesh epic, or the flood tablet, which records an Assyrian version of the flood. At this point, it would be tempting to make a brief excursion into the Upper Egyptian galleries to look at an Egyptian reed basket, probably not the one actually used by Moses, maybe similar. There's a model of a bakery, the sort of thing that I'm sure Joseph would have been most familiar with, not the model, but the bakery, of course. And then we would leave this area, go into ancient Iran. We'd take a look at the Cyrus cylinder inscribed in Babylonian cuneiform with an an account by the king of Persia of his conquest of Babylon and his policies to return captives to their homelands and to return gods to their peoples and to restore their temples. And as a result of the policies recorded on this cylinder here, the Jerusalem temple was rebuilt and the Jews were allowed to return to the land. Take a look at Ezra chapter. Well, let's take a look at the book of Ezra. Well, at this point, we would make something of a mad dash through numerous museum galleries, speeding past a plethora of fascinating items in order to make our way into the Greek and Roman life gallery. And we could spend a couple of days here easily with no problem. It's a delightful room. There are all kinds of objects associated with everyday life, many of which must have been in common use by characters of whom we read in the pages of the New Testament scriptures. For example, there's a couple of statuettes of Diana of the Ephesians, one of clay, one of bronze. And you'll remember it was Paul's preaching in Ephesus that caused a riotous reaction from tradesmen who profited from the worshippers of Diana or Artemis of the Ephesians. While we're in this room, you should look out for oil lamps, Roman armor, other everyday objects from the 1st century AD. There's some children's dancing dolls. There's a splendid bronze military diploma, which was an official military discharge inscribed on these bronze plates. A copy would have been held in Rome, and the certificate was a very precious possession that granted citizenship and the right to marry. And it's perhaps illustrative of where Paul, in his letter to the Philippians, speaks of our citizenship being in heaven. We have, if you like, such a spiritual diploma as this, the master copy of which is kept in heaven and assures us of our freedom there. There's a splendid Cairo lamp mold. This is an early Christian mold. This one here will date from the 4th, possibly 5th century AD, but it contains a very early Christian symbol, the letters Chi and Rho, the beginning letters of Christos or Christ. And this was very popular among early believers to have lamps such as this. And at that point, well, I've run over a little more than I had intended to do. So you've all been terribly, terribly well behaved. I don't think any of you have yet fallen overboard. So congratulations. You've all done very well indeed. Okay. So as we leave behind this oil lamp, we remind ourselves, encourage us to shine like lights in this world for Jesus, as this we are stamped, we are sealed with the Holy Spirit of God, and a seal that guarantees our inheritance, as did that diploma that we saw there. So there's so much more that I would love to show you. I could only suggest that you make your way, once all of this nonsense is over, make your way to London. Let me know. I'll join you there, and for the price of a free lunch, I'll give you a tour of the museum, and we'll spend a little longer than this perhaps and see many, many more things. Let me encourage you to follow us on social media. You can do so in any of these means. We're not terribly good at tweeting. We're getting a little better. And but there we go. All of this, I've put an email address there if you want to drop me a note for any reason. Any questions or comments, feel free to do that. Of course, we'll open the room up in just a moment. Anybody that wants to stay behind, I'm not planning to go anywhere. I've got nowhere to go. So there we go. So you can find us in all of those places. And if you're interested, you do go to our website. If you're interested in being involved in the work of the school and would like to become a friend of the Bible School, well, you'll find some details there on our website for that, and we'd be delighted to have you on board, as others already are. And it leaves for me to say to all of you, thank you for being with us this evening. Stay tuned, and we'll let you know of future events of this nature. But thank you all so very much for being with us.